happy Tuesday. Welcome to my show. I'm Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch with Lincoln-Goldfinch Law, an immigration law firm, here with you in English every Tuesday to talk through news headlines, what's happening in the world of immigration, explain what you're seeing on your news feeds, talk through my perspective on things, get your perspective on things, and answer your live questions about your immigration matters. As a reminder, my law firm is based in Austin, Texas. We are a virtual law firm. We have in-person and virtual appointments available. We are still offering free consultations. We started that as soon as the election happened and have not stopped yet. So reach out if you or a loved one needs advice about what to do with your immigration case. That is the number one recommendation I have for immigrants right now, is that you go directly to an immigration lawyer, not to a friend, not to a well-meaning relative, not to a notario, not to a forms preparer, not to ChatGPT or Claude. I mean, these are all things that can inform you, but ultimately going to a lawyer who has a license, who can protect you with confidentiality, is the best way to go. And we don't want any barriers to that, which is why we're continue to offer free legal consultations. The best way to secure your consultation with my firm is to DM me on any of the socials. Wherever you are watching will work. I have my team behind the scenes ready to get you connected with our schedulers. So go ahead and start sending me your questions. I'm going to touch on the news of the week and then I will get to your questions. We've got mostly the balance. The balance is toward the bad, but there's a couple of good news items. How about that? I'll start with something good. A Chief Judge John McConnell, who is a federal judge in Rhode Island, wrote a 135-page opinion striking down the country bans that the Trump administration has implemented. So if you've been paying attention, you know that the Trump administration has mostly quietly started to halt processing for applications, visas, non-immigrant visas like tourist visas, green card applications, consular appointments in a list of many, many countries, mostly in Africa and Asia region, right? The South American country that has been impacted is Venezuela. And that has been really, really problematic for tens of thousands of people over the last several months. And what this judge said, which I agree with, is that the Trump administration has implemented an arbitrary and capricious halt on processing petitions that are established by law, that Congress has said this is how people get visas, this is how they get green cards, this is how they apply for citizenship, and these are the parameters, and that the Trump administration can't just go in and unilaterally change all of that without congressional action. So this is a lower federal court judge, right on the ground level of the federal court system. The appeal would go to a circuit court and then ultimately to the Supreme Court should they take it up. So I don't think this is the last that we've heard of all of this, of course, but it's a really great first stop, and I agree with the finding of Chief Judge John McConnell. Next news item is about deaths in ICE detention. You guys have heard, if you watch my show, you know I've been talking about the deaths and detention, immigration detention are higher this year than any other previous year, I think on record, but at least in decades. And we are trending one death for every 6 days so far this year. That's because we have thousands and thousands of people in private prison for-profit facilities, so that are run by companies who have shareholders who profit off of the detention of people. And what's one way that you make profit? You cut costs. And what are the costs of detaining people? Medical care, adequate clothing, air conditioning, heating, bedding, food, schooling for children, etc. These are the costs and the expenses that get slashed when we have a for-profit entity running a prison. What's the other way you increase profits when you run a business? Is you increase revenue. and volume. That means you expand the number of clients, customers you have. And in this case, the customers would be the detained people, although it's the government that's paying. So how do these private prison companies do this? They hire lobbyists who take their interests to Washington and lobby on their behalf with Congress for expanded, longer detention. And so that's why we see these Congress not doing a whole lot when we see a 10,000 bed warehouse being stood up here, over there. And we've gone from around 50,000 people per day in detention to closer to 80,000 plus, headed toward 100,000. And Congress passed $170 billion for DHS funding last summer, and they're moving toward finalizing the $70 billion, pretty unrestricted funds for more immigration enforcement. These private prison companies and their lobbyists are active in the efforts because they are aiming to increase their revenue and cut their costs. And what does that result in? More people dying in detention. And now the news of the week, this is the source for this one is the Washington Post. The acting director of ICE, whose name is David Venturella, he sent a memo to agency employees last week on Thursday, eliminating the requirement to report deaths of people within the 30 days after they're released from detention. Why did we have this rule? Because ICE was releasing people on the eve of their death and then not counting their death in the numbers. There was a guy, this is a trigger warning, there was a guy in 2021 who was in the hospital, had been brain dead in a coma for days when ICE released him before he died, and then they didn't count his death. I've worked on a handful of cases, not about deaths, but about people who were super duper sick and needed expensive medical care and were released before that treatment needed to occur. So this is definitely something that's happened. It's definitely something that's happening now. And what they're trying to do is release people right before they die and then not count that death as toward their numbers. Next, I just referenced this. This is from the Associated Press. The $70 billion package has passed the Senate. It was a middle of the night vote, which is always a little like, what's going on in the middle of the night in the Senate? Heading to the House. It has been called an ATM for ICE by certain pro-immigrant advocates. What's noteworthy about the $70 billion is it's kind of carte blanche. It's a little bit of a blank check. Usually in these funding packages, there's many, 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 many pages of restrictions and instructions on how this money is getting spent. And this is a bit of a blank check, $70 billion package, which, as previously mentioned, is obviously going to go toward detaining people, more people for longer at lower costs. Good news. Let's do a good news item. This is from The Guardian. So Judge Leo Sorokin in Boston, we've heard he's had some good rulings. I think we're liking him. We're liking how he's showing up. Judge Sorokin. This is a 42-page ruling in a lawsuit filed by 20 attorneys general from Democratic states challenging the $100,000 H-1B fee. And the judge, I didn't see this one coming, so I'm excited about this. This was a 20 to 50-fold increase in the filing fee. Of $100,000 is insane. We've talked about that. And the judge's reasoning in his block on this fee is that it's not an increase. It's not a traditional increase in fee. It actually amounts to a tax. And only Congress has the power of the purse, the power to levy taxes. And so this $100,000 fee is the executive branch attempting to levy a tax without going through Congress. Kind of probably similar to the tariffs, right? And so Judge Sorokin found that this fee doesn't apply, which will be really great for a lot of people who want to apply for H-1Bs, a lot of businesses that want to be able to hire H-1B employees as well. And then our final news item, this is maddening. This is from Mother Jones. They have revealed that since October of last year, so basically this fiscal year, the federal fiscal year starts in October. So when you say this year federally, that means starting October 1, 2025. The U.S. has only accepted 6,668 refugees. Guess how many of those refugees were white South Africans? 6,665 white South Africans. And this is why, if you listen to the Daily like I do, I get mad at them and I tell you guys about it when I get mad at them. But they had a story about, where is it? It's in Arkansas. This group that is trying to establish a whites-only community in rural, I think it's Arkansas. And it violates all sorts of traditional housing protection rules, of course, because it's whites only. And the way that they're trying to get around it is to create this community with a fee, and then you're granted land when you enroll yourself in this community, which is it's a stretch, right? It's an attempted stretch on the rules that protect housing, diversity in housing. And the two guys who have started this community intentionally decided to do it now under this administration because they knew that they would essentially, at worst, have a hands-off approach from this administration, which so far has been the case. So that is what's happening with refugees. And let's just talk about Afrikaners, right? White South Africans. It's pretty nefarious because, of course, post-apartheid, a lot of the white South Africans, the Afrikaners, were involved in enforcing apartheid in South Africa. And then when apartheid fell, some white South Africans faced things like, losing their power, losing their land, losing their control, losing their privilege. And that made them sad, and that hurt their feelings. And they started to see themselves as victims of racism, and they started to apply to the United States as refugees. And certain people within the Trump administration see a lot of similarities between themselves and these white South Africans, these Afrikaners who came in as refugees. And that should concern us, that anybody in our administration is comfortable saying that of all of the people around the globe, from all the countries who suffer all sorts of horrors, female genital mutilation, etc. I don't know if I can say that on a live stream, but I did. That the ones that we are going to admit, every single one this year, except for 3, are going to be white South Africans. So there you have it. In case anybody was looking for evidence of racism in Trump's immigration policies. There it is right there. Okay, and thank you to all of the press that is publishing all of this. That one was Mother Jones. We really appreciate the journalism and the reporting. It is not a fun time to be a journalist. They're really out there battling. Another good New York Times Daily was the story on what happened at 60 Minutes and the interview with the longtime journalist, like 37 years, who had been at 60 Minutes. And the CBS takeover and all of that. If you're interested in all of that stuff, New York Times did a piece on that. And then the Daily podcast was all about that too. So that's worthy of attention for all of us. But it's outside of the purview of immigration, so I won't belabor it here. Let's talk about your questions. This is on Instagram. It's in Spanish. I'll repeat it in English. Usted puede comunicarme directamente o es solo con los paralegales. Sí, estoy en mis redes, en mis mensajes en mis redes. Mi equipo en Lincoln-Goldfinch Law, somos un equipo de 15 abogados y asistentes legales también son parte del equipo. Entonces, cuando trabajan con mi despacho, van a tener un grupo, un equipo, un abogado que es lo que empieza su caso. Tenemos primero su sesión de estrategia con tu abogado y cualquier pregunta legal durante el proceso va a ser con tu abogado en nuestro despacho. Sí tenemos paralegales, pero también tenemos abogados en tus casos. Y yo soy la supervisora del equipo de los abogados. Okay. Chispa this was a question. Let me repeat this in English. This was, when you work with me, do you talk to me directly or do you talk to the paralegals? The best way to communicate with me directly is through DMs and the socials. When I am the owner of the law firm, and we are a team of 15 lawyers, and we have legal assistants too. So there are reasons to talk to the assistants, like if we're preparing your forms and you're providing your information to complete your forms. And then there's times to speak to your lawyer, like when you first hire us as your firm and we do a strategy session, that's going to be with your lawyer. And then if you have a legal question arise, you'll talk to your lawyer. So there's times that you talk to your lawyer, there's times you talk to your legal assistant, depending on what the needs are. And that's how we work. But everybody is very knowledgeable and good and will provide you the level of answer that you need depending on what's happening. Because, for example, you wouldn't want to ask me what forms you're missing on your application that we're working on, because what I would do is go to your paralegal and ask them to tell me. So we get you to the right person to answer your question. Okay, Chispa de Bomba, my friend who's always here. Should congressional expedites work now that the judge in Rhode Island ruled as he did before any appeal or emergency request gets processed? Maybe, yeah. I think it definitely gives a boost to the congressional expedites. I think they're probably going to appeal the decision. I doubt that the Trump administration will be like, oh, a federal judge said we can't do that. Now we're going to stop doing that and just start approving all these applications. I don't think it's that simple. But that plus congressional expedite is definitely a good idea. Maybe even media. Now that this ruling has come out, my guess is that there are a lot of reporters who are interested in doing human interest stories on the impacts that these policies have on people. And I can tell you, as an attorney who gets a lot of inquiries from the press, they are always looking for impacted clients. Always. They always want to tell the stories of how these policies matter to people in their lives. And that can be a really hard thing to find because, understandably, imagine you're undocumented, you're from Venezuela, you're waiting for your case to get approved, and the last thing you want to do is go blast your face all over the internet and criticize the administration because it feels like a vulnerable thing to do. So you have to be very thoughtful and careful about whether you go public. It's definitely something that you want to do in the hands of a lawyer. But sometimes public eyes, like attention on your case, can help as well. And I'll highlight the case of the Labrador family that we recently worked on. This was the kiddos and the mom who were detained at the bus stop. They were walking to the bus stop and ICE surrounded them and took the mom and the kids. And there was this massive public outcry. They live in San Antonio in the Alamo Heights neighborhood. So the community was very reactive. Congressman Castro was immediately involved and responsive. There was a press conference about it, lots of media attention. And we filed their habeas case and got an answer in a week, which is very fast for a habeas. So I think that, the judge doesn't say oh, the public opinion has swayed me here. We don't know that for sure. But I can tell you in the 20 years that I've done this, I have used media attention on cases successfully many, many times. And it's got to be a really clean case. You have to be willing to go public. There's a lot of factors involved in analyzing whether it's a good case to take publicly, but that can also be another lever that you can pull. In talking about these delays, if you've got a case where someone's squeaky clean, filed on time, pending too long, done everything right, the delay is causing harm to them, their community, their company, their family, there's an illness, there's some compelling reason why we tell this story, that can actually happen before the congressional inquiry or in tandem with the congressional inquiry. If you have a congressperson who's willing to go on record publicly as being basically a pro-immigrant legislator, then you can ask them for support while you're doing media, and the whole thing can get even bigger. So there's some ways you can do this stuff. Mache Sanchez, do you think if someone adjusted their status by marriage with a U.S. citizen would have issues in the N-400 if they overstayed their tourist visa, have a stable job and criminal record? No. So first of all, let me just touch on the adjustment of status stuff. We're not seeing a huge problem in the adjustment of status arena. They walked back the memo and they were like, well, but we're not saying people aren't eligible. We're just saying there's discretion, right? Which is what we said as soon as we saw the memo, like, this is illegal, and why don't we add some discretionary factors? So, and we're still seeing approvals on adjustments. So let me just say that too, like I think that the adjustment of status noise was way more bark than bite ultimately. But also it never was intended to apply to citizenship cases. So once you have your green card, you can ignore the adjustment of status stuff. Okay, I think that's going to be my last question for today. We'll be together on Thursday in Spanish. And then, as always, I like to end with an action item of the week. These are times that we want to stay civically engaged and be sort of creative in the ways that we are engaged, and not just always say like, vote, register to vote, call your legislator, which all things we need to do, but what else? It's Pride Month. It's June, right? So let's focus on Pride and specifically our trans community. I actually have a friend who was going on a road trip, a trans friend, was going on a road trip and was brutally attacked and hospitalized near the bathrooms at a rest stop last week. It is a horrible, scary, terrifying time to be a trans person in this country because the administration wants to attack you and take away your rights. And there are people all over this country who are rabid in their hatred for the trans community. So what does that mean? That means our love for the trans community has to be louder and stronger than the hatred that's showing up in this administration right now. So in Austin on June 13th, which is this Saturday, there's a place called the Swan Dive Bar, and they're having a music and drag show, which is raising funds for gender affirming surgeries. So that's an event in Austin that you could attend. And also look at wherever you are. Look for a local Pride event, specifically trans Pride. And think of a way that you can support that community this week because our love needs to be louder than the hate right now. So thanks everybody for being with me. We'll see each other on Thursday in Spanish. Have a great rest of the week.